the lunch talk of CINÉMA COPAINS, ARNE HECTOR and MINZE TUMMESCHEIT. They are doing for the first time, as far as I know, the history of the SummerAcademy and analog film course. Yeah, I'm happy you're here. Thank you for your talk.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. We prepared some film excerpts for you, and all of them will be in English except one. I'm sorry we didn't have the time to translate, but most of it will be in English. In the short text on the talk, we announced that we will speak about the role of artistic and social commitment in the creation of the public urban space. And we will come to it, but a little bit later. Thinking about it more closely, we thought we should try to embed it in our filmic work so that you can see the context in which the images and thoughts evolved. When I was thinking of how to introduce our filmic work to you, without showing the films, but very short excerpts of some of them, I felt they are so different from each other that it's difficult to bring them together in the short time of a talk. It occurred to me that it is easier to find a red line when thinking of our field of interest, so I will talk a little bit about that. In our first long documentary, Jahrmarkt Europa, we were interested in the role of women in the hard transformation times from socialism to capitalism in the states of the former Soviet Union. The film is a portrait of two women sustaining their families with a border-crossing trade. The marketplace was the so-called Jahrmarkt Europa in Warsaw. They became traders out of necessity, having originally nothing to do with trade, and having been educated in a planned economy. Becoming subjects of a sort of grassroots, self-organized and informal market economy, they experience as well a kind of empowerment as the brutalities of capitalism. This is the first excerpt of Jahrmarkt Europa.
Покупаем покушать. Пиво чешское. Водочка есть, вода минеральная.
Recognizing the stations and the landscapes by the tracks is like watching a film you like for the second time. You notice more details because you already know how the plot goes. The encounter is cooler and there's a certain detachment which is quite useful for filming. We're on our way to Penza for the second time. Although I don't have any financing for this film, I can afford to return, but it would also be correct to say, precisely because I don't have any financing for this film, I can afford to return. When I compare my work to that of Svetlana and Kaleria, I can't get over the distance this reveals. A simple example illustrates the disparity. It usually costs around €3,000 to telescene 2 hours of material on 16mm film. That's the total amount of film material I've used, the rest is video. To make this sum, Kaleria, who makes an average of $100 per trip, would have to travel to Warsaw 30 times. Or, put another way, it would take her almost 5 years to earn this amount, and she would travel 120,000 kilometers. I don't know how to deal with this information. It just emphasizes the enormous distance separating the worlds I've moved between these last few years. The sense of strangeness on both sides also needs to be mentioned. Although I now know what $100 means for Kaleria, it still seems disproportionate to travel 4,000 kilometers every 2 months to earn $100. I value the time and the effort that the journey costs her differently than she does. Looking at it from the other side, Caleria is the only one who steadfastly believes that any money will come out of this film project. She can't imagine it any other way. The time, the money I'm investing in this project doesn't make any sense to her unless it results in profit.
So this was Jahrmarkt Europa, or a very tiny little part of it. We decided to focus on a certain aspect and to make it short because of time. That's why we didn't show the protagonists in this small part. But if you wish to, you can borrow the film in the library. The project we are currently working on is about the highest possible abstraction in capitalism. A significant, but at least here, not commonly known sector of the financial market, the trade with derivatives. Derivatives are financial instruments which allow to bet on future prices of all sorts of commodities, stocks, or currencies. Our film Fictions and Futures is about a specific derivative called futures, with which one can speculate on the future price of corn, for instance. The thesis is that speculation on basic food is driving up prices for staple food worldwide. And there is quite some evidence for this thesis. In the first part of Fictions and Futures, the voiceover, there is only voiceover, no interviews, is a collage of quotations, found interviews, and our own text, assembled as a fictitious dialogue between fictitious characters. We will now show an excerpt of the film. Just a minute, just a second. The first part of this longer project, because we seem to engage only in longer project, was conceived as a video installation, and there was one screen with the picture and a second screen you won't see now with the text. The text was a little bit like a glossary to the financial world.
That's why you have to understand the market first. Famous market psychiatrist Dr. Robert Schumann has analyzed market behavior for more than 20 years now. He has the market on his couch. And this is my question for Dr. Schumann. Can we understand the market?
Markets are very sensitive, and you and I need to be very sensitive too, so we can foresee what a specific market is up to. Considering all the bull and bear personalities around, we have to accept that the market reacts with very irregular cycles. In fact, the market has a manic-depressive character by nature. From the clinical perspective, manic depression is the reason for irritating price signals. However, this disease shouldn't be cured. It should be fostered. Once we nurture the market with lots of liquidity, it's precisely this bipolar disorder which produces the amazing degrees of volatility that we like to see.
The trend is your friend. Your friend. What's wrong with your friend?
Okay, for those who are not familiar with this kind of strange costumes these men are wearing, all these men in these colored jackets are traders at the Chicago Board of Trade, where you trade futures and other derivatives. So, where am I? Yeah. In between these projects you have just seen the excerpts from, we started a long-term project. And I think it's still fitting in our field of interest, but it looks different. It is a filmic search on collective action, organized as a chain of interviews from one collective to the next. We conducted the first interview, our interlocutor, the next one, and so on. Each part of the series is based on a dialogue between members of these collectives. We started the chain in France, in a self-organized film lab. Then went on with Nicolas from this lab, this lab is called L'Abominable, to a political group in Paris, the Coordination des Intermittents et Précaires, and with two women activists from this coordination, we went on to Sicily to interview two cooperatives. So part 3 and 4 of the series are dedicated to cooperatives in Italy, and especially to Sicilian anti-mafia cooperatives, which work under particular conditions. And I want to give you, before showing you an excerpt, I want to give you a short introduction to what is going on in Sicily and what are these particular conditions. In 1982, Pio La Torre, a chairman of the Communist Party of Sicily, proposed a bill in Parliament that made membership in the mafia a punishable offense, while also allowing for the confiscation of the mafia's ill-gotten gains. La Torre was assassinated before the law was adopted, but some years later this law was introduced and is since then the basis for the cooperatives in Sicily. Confiscated land buildings, machines, and so on, are given to cooperatives and associations for social purposes. In the case of Placido Rizzotto, an agricultural co-op, they work on land that once belonged to mafiosi. That's part 3 of the series. I Sicaliani, they are in part 4, and we are going to show something from them. A social cooperative is one of the oldest cooperatives in Palermo. They started out with a street theater to reappropriate the public space and to denounce the bad state of affairs in Palermo. They were also one of the first groups in Italy to make theater plays with young people in jail. When we met them, they were organizing the one and only public ludoteca. A ludoteca is a place for children to play, and they also use the play to, as a, I could say, education tool. In the center of Palermo, and they just had, in the center of Palermo, this ludoteca is in the very center of Palermo. And they just had successfully applied for a mandarin garden to open up a countryside ludoteca. Before, this plot of land belonged to a powerful mafia family. The excerpts of the interview chain we will show are coming from parts that we are currently still working on, so they are still a little bit raw.
And also in this part we don't have English subtitles, so we will have to give us a brief summary, maybe in between or afterwards.
Et le bien confisqué, c'est le terrain, c'est un terrain dans ce village?
Il bene confiscato è solo il terreno in questo villaggio o ha anche qualche, c'è una casa costruita sopra? È solo terreno?
No, è solo terreno, perché per le case non abbiamo fatto mai richiesta, perché noi abbiamo studiato la legge, abbiamo fatto un corso per i beni confiscati e la devi prendere così com'è, cioè se ci sono per esempio ipoteche o non sono state pagate delle cose ne assumi la responsabilità tu, però noi siamo troppo piccoli per avere anche una struttura come casa, perché non ce la fanno vedere prima. Sì. Tu la devi prendere a scatola chiusa.
Dall'elenco da internet.
Ok? Sì.
Negli ultimi anni l'esempio della Sicilia e dell'Italia si sta riproponendo anche in altri stati dove c'è lo stesso problema e si sono resi conto che è utile dare il bene ai cittadini per riqualificarlo. Si toglie potere, si toglie soldi, uguale potere. Quindi togliere un bene è la peggiore punizione, non il carcere.
No, è vero.
È togliere la cosa, l'oggetto di potere, il terreno, sì. La casa.
Ma sulle strutture?
Anche la casa.
Wir haben uns gefragt, welche Bilder die Mafia beschreiben könnten. Als soziales Phänomen ist sie unsichtbar. Zu sehen sind jedoch die Orte, an denen ihr Kapital in Beton gegossen seine Rückkehr aus der Dunkelziffer in die sichtbare Welt des Bruttosozialprodukts feiert. Palermo ist ein Monument dieser anhaltenden Feierlichkeiten. Als in den 70er Jahren die Einnahmen aus dem Drogengeschäft ganz Sizilien überschwemmten und investiert werden mussten, entstand auf dem Pizzusella mit exklusivem Blick, aber ohne stichhaltige Baugenehmigung, ein Siedlungsprojekt. Bereits in der Bauphase konnte der Boss der Bosse, Michele Greco, das Projekt verkaufen und damit das eingesetzte Kapital plus X ganz legal in die nächste Runde der Akkumulation schicken. Heute befindet sich hier, bestehend aus Luxusvillen und modernen Ruinen, eine gated Community, deren Bewohner ihre Heime gegen Bauamt und Anti-Mafia-Bewegung verteidigen.
Et concernant les quartiers difficiles de Palerme, Comment vous vous y prenez pour aller rencontrer les familles, pour faire venir les enfants à la ludothèque? Comment ça se passe ce travail-là?
Noi qui abbiamo avuto molta violenza anche addosso a noi. E allora quindi il primo periodo è stato utile per fare un patto col territorio. Perché ci vedono altrimenti come gli invasori. Allora siamo andati casa per casa, così ti spiego il metodo, casa per casa, a creare un rapporto col genitore minore.
È un legame con la conoscenza della struttura e del nostro lavoro.
Quindi persona per persona e attraverso i centri sociali e attraverso le scuole. E noi donne essere qua come responsabili è stata una vittoria. Perché questo è un quartiere dove la figura maschile comanda. Quindi noi qui abbiamo lavorato sulla differenza di genere, quindi non c'è maschio o femmina nei giochi, e nella competizione non c'è maschio o femmina, quindi mettere il gioco come mediatore che è uguale per tutti i sessi e tutti possiamo vincere. Però questo quartiere, in questi 11 anni è rosa, possiamo fare un'analisi, perché c'è stato ora l'incremento, allora si va modificando, adesso c'è ceto basso, ceto medio e ceto alto.
E molti bambini immigrati.
E questo è un luogo di integrazione ed è la cosa più difficile che possa esserci. Sì, che sono state vendute le case qua dietro a tutti ricchi. La gente qua era mista oggi.
E dunque c'è sempre più contrasto fra le diverse classi.
Infatti. Che qua avviene l'incontro o lo scontro e noi dobbiamo gestire. Perché il ricco dà fastidio al bambino con i pidocchietti che sono immigrati.
So in the beginning of this excerpt, we saw a hill with. I just give a brief summary in English. We saw this hill with houses, partly ruins and partly nice villas. This was actually a construction project by a very famous mafioso, Michele Greco, who was initiating this project in the 70s. When he was, particularly him, actually he was making billions because he had just started to open the hub for drug trade in Europe, and he got it from, which was before in the south of France. So he managed to actually transport all the laboratories to Sicily, and he made an enormous amount of money, so this money had to be invested. And the best way, still until today, is building houses. And this is also maybe a reason why Palermo looks like it looks today. I think being in Palermo, I always had the impression that this is actually quite an avant-garde city in terms of quite early, even it started in the 60s. The city center, which until today, you saw it in the pictures at the end, consists of ruins of old palaces. It's a beautiful place, but it was completely given up, and at the same time also the public space actually was given up in Palermo due to problems in renovating these palaces, but then also in the war some of them were demolished, and there was a kind of earthquake then later, so people moved out of the center, and it was gradually given up and taken over by, that's it's a bit exaggerated maybe, but basically to the influence of mafia families. And there was a kind of process that seemed, for a long time, it seemed to be going on without any chance of getting to a stop. For example, in the 60s, also the whole city government basically was taken over by mafia connections. And there was one famous night, just before an election, when over 400 what was the name? Building permits were signed, just before the guy who was responsible for doing it had to resign the next day. So what happened then? This process actually got very famous under the name of the sacking of Palermo. At the same time, a lot of people moved into Palermo from the countryside. So the demand for housing was enormous, much to the joy of the local mafia, who was, as I just said before, was happy to build new houses. Also, we saw it in the film, like these amazing amount of big housing projects, which basically make up the greatest part of Palermo nowadays. So after the sacking of Palermo, what happened was a period of big profits and intimidating violence. The public space of Palermo and also the cultural spaces were given up. All initiatives that questioned the reign of the mafia clans were deemed to fail. Money given by the national government for social housing or the restructuring of important monuments like the Teatro Massimo was directly or indirectly canalized towards mafia projects. Only in the 80s, with an unbearable war among mafia families going on, some people started to stand up and demand a restructuring of civil society and public space. The new mayor, Leoluca Orlando, compared the social change to a cart with two wheels, one being culture and the other so-called legalità, an Italian expression for lawful behavior as well as law enforcement. Still, everybody who opposed the old regime was in acute danger. In 1992, the killing of two state prosecutors finally let people's anger overwhelm their fear. Thousands of people openly demonstrated on Palermo streets for the first time, while the mafia continued its activities now soundlessly. Many of the no-go areas were refurbished. The Teatro Massimo was finally reopened after construction firms from outside Sicily had finished the reconstruction. The cultural change, however, remains a task until today and is mostly carried out by engaged groups of citizens, such as the cooperatives that we were visiting. Those people who learned not to rely too much on the ever-changing tides of political support. So then I would briefly introduce the sixth part of this same interview chain, where we come to Hamburg, and in the center of this part are two political groups called 9 to 5 and Lux und Konsorten, whose members are active in a wide range of other groups and associations in Hamburg, thus forming a network with remarkable outreach when it comes to political debates and conflicts in city planning. 9 to 5, for example, has been organizing the annual May Day parades that address precarious working conditions, with 5,000 to 6,000 people taking part each year. Lux and Konsorten, on the other hand, focuses on affordable workspace for small and alternative businesses and all sorts of creative and scientific freelancers. Considering the average price for renting in Hamburg, their demands have an almost revolutionary touch. But interestingly, with their actions and well-connected networks, they managed to force the city government into negotiations about the future use of currently empty buildings. This marks an important step away from the concept of city planning predominant for many years, to sell everything for the highest possible price and thus caring only for big investors. We will see some pictures from Hamburg, from the Hafen city here. In Hamburg, this kind of neoliberal thinking can most prominently be admired in the so-called Hafen city. A new district built from scratch on the former harbor area with lots of canals and docks. These canals and docks are now serving as picturesque background for an expensive and cold architecture that hosts corporate headquarters, such as the one we briefly saw before of Unilever. And at the same time, high-priced city lofts like the Marco Polo Tower, with a record of 25,000 euro per square meter on the top level. The old geographical structure of artificial islands, with only a handful of bridges connecting Hafen City to the rest of town, adds to the perception of a virtually gated community. During daytime, some tourists find their way in, but after office hours, the place becomes a desert, much to the distress of planners and investors. Most famously, the Hamburg Philharmonie, being planned as a new landmark for the district, as well as a symbol for a booming Hamburg, is constantly on the edge of becoming the city's biggest construction ruin after the projected costs multiplied over the years. So let's watch some images from an action of Lux and Konsorten, this group that we were working with.
So, was ist jetzt hier? Was ist mit Tim? Wie Uhr ist es jetzt?
7 vor 2. 13:53 Uhr.
Und wir fangen jetzt an. Ah ja, los.
Wer fängt denn?
Haben wir alles? Hast du die Schrauben? Ja. Gut.
Okay, auseinander. Weit ist möglich. Okay, wollte ich schon mal die alle wieder einrollen?
Das heißt, man müsste es bis zu der Säule einrollen.
Bis zur Säule.
Bis zur Säule.
Hier, ne?
Wir haben nur einen.
Ja, es war
So this was actually the first action that this group was doing, performing, and it was the first action in a series of events that followed then later, in which they tried to address like this issue of empty space in Hamburg, where at the same time it's almost impossible if you try to get cheap workspace as for artists or for small businesses or also for all kinds of activities actually. The building that is shown here in the film was then soon after torn down, so this action failed actually. But the group kept the name, which derived from this building, because before there was a Lux company inside there. But as I said, the group continued and put a lot of pressure also on the city officials. And maybe this is also the reason why it now seems they reached the first goal, signing a contract and buying a former military barracks in Altona at a price that will actually allow for a rent as cheap as the demanded €5 per square meter. This €5 you can more or less see here on this picture, which is an incredible price for Hamburg.
Even for Berlin now.
Yes. More than 150 people already formed the Fuchs cooperative to provide themselves with studios, offices and workshops in this new building. In this buying contract, the city proposed a formulation declaring that the project is to give space to the so-called creative industry. The cooperative tried to avoid the term in the contract, as it plans to also give space to social and other activities that can only uneasily be subsumized under the title of creative industries. However, they had to accept this term in order to get a subsidized price. The city officials insisting illustrates the actual paradigm of city planning. A key to a city's attractiveness is the presence of the creative class, a term being coined by Richard Florida in his book The Rise of the Creative Class in 2002. After the great transformation from the industrial to the creative economy, only creative people, Florida states, are the key to economic growth. What he calls the super creative core includes a wide range of professions, ranging from artists to bankers, scientists to web designers. Everyone else is advised to creatify their work. Cities, on the other hand, would have no future if they don't develop what Florida calls the 3 T's: technology, talent, and tolerance. Over the years, Florida's message was embraced by city governors worldwide, and their cities submitted to a new set of rankings: a creativity index, a gay index, or a bohemian index. Yet, rather than provide universal uplift, as promised in Florida's book, the clustering of high-earning professionals has exposed inequalities both between and within cities. The so-called, it's a nice English expression, the so-called Uber gentrification is one of the negative results that trouble Hamburg, St. Pauli, just like Neukölln in Berlin, Brooklyn or San Francisco. In Hamburg, though, the creativity discourse can be observed in all its ambiguity. On the one hand, Florida's dream, I quote, a city that competes for people as well as firms, a city of symbols and experiences, the city as an arena for consumption, for entertainment, and for amenities. In reality, end of quote. In reality, this means a city privatizing public space to investors, allowing for private security, then controlling the ground, and sending away people who don't fit into the profile of the creative class. This is actually already happening in Hamburg, also in the center of the red light district in St. Pauli. On the other hand, the city's sudden interest in creative people allowed political and artistic initiatives such as Lux and Consorten to play with these expectations and utilize their creative potential as an asset.
Yeah, we want to talk briefly about a project in public space, an art project in public space. We think is quite a good example, or positive example for us. Sorry, we have only not so nice images from the internet, but for those who don't know Hamburg, you get at least an idea of what it is. So this is a picture of Park Fiction. It's crowded, as you see, there's some event going on. And I will speak a little bit about this project. The images you have seen before were filmed in January this year. We stayed in one of the houses in Hafenstraße. This park is just next to them. At first glance, the park does not seem anything special. Can you show the next picture? An empty space with a spectacular view. Maybe the next one you see the view. It's very small, but you have a nice view on the harbor. But in fact, this is precisely what makes it unique. This emptiness and this view. To illustrate what this slope at the border of the river Elbe means for St. Pauli and for Hamburg in a concrete and in a symbolic way, we need to say a few words about the history. In the 80s, the houses of Hafenstraße were the center of the squatters movement in Hamburg. The line of houses with a fantastic view on the harbor was empty and in decline due to speculative interests. As the Park Fiction Working Group specifically refers to the battles of the 80s, I want to quote from a text by them from 1998. I quote, "At the height of the battles surrounding Hafenstraße, barricades are erected all the way into the red light district. Radio Hafenstraße broadcasts around the clock. The city feared civil war-like conditions, were the tattooed buildings to be cleared. And all of this was not a result of worker struggles like those of the social movements corresponding to industrialization, but instead, while taking up these struggles, driven by the desire for self-determined life and dwelling, or another translation of Lefebvre's term, habiting, this was the end of the phrase, sorry. They refer, this working group for the Park Fiction Project, they refer a lot to Henri Lefebvre and his book La Révolution Urbaine from 1972. This desire, born in the private sphere, became a revolutionary force, and the squatters won. Now these houses, which were the ones you see there, are organized as a cooperative. Hafenstraße is not only a place where people have cheap rents because of not-for-profit self-organization, and where a self-determined life is possible, but the successful fight for these houses snatched them away from the real estate market. These houses would be a gold mine for any investor. So, the ongoing project Park Fiction is situated in the continuity of these struggles. Already in the early 90s, a local association, the Hafenrandverein, called for a park in this place. In 1997, a funding from the municipal program for art and public space was achieved. The artists involved don't understand themselves as initiatives. I quote again, "The autonomous artist subject is completely absorbed in a collective production of desires and a public planning process. Across common interests and concrete goals, alliances have been established between people with different backgrounds and from the most various contexts. Politicized residents, deregulated layout men, priests, squatters, a militant female cook, hedonistic social workers, kiosk operators, geography students and musicians from the Poodle Club scene. They say, I quote again, "Park fiction is art in public space understood as a practical critique of urban planning from the perspective of the users." Thank you. If we can let some light in.
I would like to ask a question, perhaps a stupid question, but still, I'm asking myself, what is the connection between your filmic work as analog filmers, or most of the time analog filmers, and this group like Park Fiction, or, I mean, why do you deal with, for example, with these cooperatives, with this filmic language of analog film, you could also do videos?
First, I might have to disappoint you a little bit about our filmic work, because we use both. We film a lot on video too. We use analog film and we use video, and we sometimes mix it in one film. So we are not, at least I can say for myself, maybe Arne says something else. I think every project has to find its own form and also its own material. And some projects are just not, I mean, you can always make an analog film on all kinds of subjects, but sometimes it doesn't seem to fit for me to use analog film material. Of course, it's also a question of, it's not only the form or how it looks like, it's sometimes also a question of money, of course. Still, if you develop yourself, you have to buy the film material. So I'm not very strict in if I use this or that material. If I go for a project, I decide before what seems to me is fitting. How come that we got involved in the scene? It is really, it came from our project, this chain of interview. It's a project on video, because in the center of this project is a lot of talking. It's all about discourse. So to do this on analog film is really quite hard. It's difficult and expensive and so on. So it's a video project, and it was not intended that we would go in the direction of city planning and city politics. It was really, of course, we were showing now these two excerpts and these two part of series because there is a connection to city, and we were asked to look for something that is connected to city politics. But actually we were surprised ourselves then how much we found out that in Palermo how important the politics and the history of the city is to explain what is going on there, and also to explain the background of the group we were portraying. And in Hamburg, it also evolved in the middle of filming. We didn't start out with this subject. We started out with a group that was basically working on the problem of precarity and precarious work. And then it evolved into a group that was mainly doing these kind of actions and getting more and more involved in city planning and city politics.
I'm interested in the sound work, what you do in your videos? Because in the one where you were filming in Chicago, it was like very experimental sounds in it. So do you work together with bands, or do you do it your own, or sometimes work with sound what comes out of the city?
Yes, both actually. In Chicago we took a lot of sound, and we just used. We didn't actually manipulate it very much. It's what you get when you are on the street and record the sound. But we asked a friend to do what we in German you would call a trailer for a radio, like small clips, to announce a program or to make a message in a very short a jingle. So that was the idea, and we gave her like little sentences or words that we wanted to be in this jingles, and she produced them for us.
Yeah, that's these jingles. I mean, you heard one of the jingles. There's several jingles in the film, and it's also a quote from a book about trading futures. The trend is your friend. So she composed the jingle with these words.
How are you distributing your work, or how do you reach your viewers?
That's a good question. This is actually different with each film. The Yarmulke Europa, that was where you saw the first excerpt of, was as all, well, more or less. This one was actually produced completely independently, just by us. And then only after it premiered at the Berlinale, we got a call from the television. And then we were able to sell it to RT, which was amazing for us at this moment. Because at that time, it's 10 years ago, and at that time the television was still giving quite a lot of money, which changed completely. And also nowadays, this was there. Then also without really planning, because you can't really plan because you get your knowledge over time there a bit. We saw that there was a lot of interest from art exhibitions and other like let's say from the art field, and also it showed that actually it's for us and the films that we do, it's much easier to somehow get, even if small, but some funding from cultural or artist institutions and finance.
Yeah, one could say that we are really pretty much in between the chairs, as we say in German, between art world and cinema world, and we never, I think I'm right if I say we never got any funding from cinema. It's if we have any funding, it's from art, for art projects. That has a lot of reasons. I don't know if you're interested in if I start out talking about that. If somebody wants to ask us later, we can talk about it.
Yeah,
it's a whole big subject. Why is it like this? But it has also to do with, and I think it's important to understand our work with, that we don't work with the production, which is normal if you make long films. So we always produce our films ourselves, which means also that our films belong to us 100%, and we can do with them what we want. This is important to us, but sometimes a little bit difficult and maybe not always smart.
maybe just briefly, because I think it's quite interesting if you are working in this field or planning to do so. It's a bit different according to each country. For example, in Germany, you had quite a lot of possibilities for cultural film funding until the end of the 80s. And then, which made possible films like those of Fassbinder and a lot of other people that made fantastic films at the time. But then in the 80s, there was a change in the concept of how film funding should be done and what kind of effects it should produce. And at that time, all the cultural film funding institutions were either closed or taken over by the more like the industrial film funding. And this was then a start for a shift that you can see until today. And if you want to get, if you apply for money at a German film foundation, first of all, you need a production company, and you need to show that you already had a lot of success before. Unless you show this, you won't get any money.
30% of them, but don't go into
details. No details, no, but and only some institutions, like in Berlin, you have the Medienboard Berlin-Brandenburg, and because in Berlin you have a lot of people who work in the sphere between art and cinema, producing a lot of short films and experimental films. So there is a huge demand for some institutional funding, and there the discussion is for us quite interesting, and we took part quite a lot. But it shows that because the institution who is giving the funds to these rather artistic projects is the same that gives funds to really big American productions that produce some part of their films in this area and in this region. So they come with the same thinking, and it's just completely stupid if you want to make a short independent film.
Maybe to answer your question, because
let
us not go deep into it, because it's maybe not so interesting, but the films are shown in various contexts, at discussions in cinemas, at festivals, art exhibitions, sometimes in different contexts. Not so much in the TV. I think it was exceptional.
Well, I have a statement. So I understand that your work is quite a pioneer work, like in the time when the films were on 60 millimeters, starting with that. So what you are doing now is just the same kind of pioneer work.
I don't know, maybe. At least it's like in the positive and negative sense. We are comforted with that also when we try to edit it and make some sense of the material that we gather.
Any questions? Or we can also end it here, and you will have the possibility to talk to us when you meet us somewhere here. Okay, thank you for coming.